Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Jeff Pittman. I'm Chancellor of St. Louis Community College. I'm so delighted, my extreme pleasure to welcome each of you here today to the State of the St. Louis Workforce event. I can't believe this is number 15. This is our 15th annual event for the report, and this is my 9th. And it's going by so fast. I was sharing with Robert a few minutes ago. It's just like you kind of just hang on with time. But things are really going well for the college. We're starting classes on Monday. I'll talk a little bit about some of the projects we're working on in a couple of minutes. But just wanted to make sure I welcome everyone here. I see so many familiar faces. I believe I have two trustees here. First is Trustee Mary Lukey. Could you stand up, Mary? We recognize Mary, appreciate her leadership. And I saw Dr. Craig Larson in the room. He's over there. Thank you, Dr. Larson. I'm hoping, since I have 7 bosses, I hope I'm not missing one of them. If any other trustees are here, please stand. Okay, I think I'm safe there. And also glad to have Dr. Sam Page here with us, the county executive. Sam, thank you for being here. It's also great to be back in person again. Our enrollment looks really strong for the fall semester, and we're noticing we're having more students now come onto the campuses. Online education, is starting to change in terms of the amount of interest. So I think that's a good sign too, that things are getting back to a little bit more normal, pre-pandemic times and enrollments. Well, we've got a lot going on in the college, as I mentioned. We're breaking ground on 6 new construction projects. I think maybe we planned it this way, or it's just blind luck. We have our groundbreaking for our 3rd building this Friday at Flow Valley. It's our new advanced manufacturing center. The theme for this report is advanced manufacturing and startup companies. So that really worked out well in starting this up. But the college, thanks to the taxpayers' approval of Prop R about 2 years ago, we're investing $450 million in new projects to expand workforce training and high-need programs like healthcare, IT, advanced manufacturing, financial services, biotechnology, and transportation. So we have a lot of things going on right now. I hope that you use this report in your everyday work lives. We use it here. Quite frankly, that's the context for how we're planning all this expansion right now. So we found the report very useful and beneficial for us. Well, I want to give some special thanks here. First of all, I want to thank the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis for once again partnering with us. And our senior economist, Charles Gascon, is here. Charles, could you stand up and let's give him, he's going to speak here in a few minutes. Certainly want to thank our other workforce partners, including the Missouri Economic Research and Information Center, who produced all of the economic data within our report, the Missouri Chamber of Commerce and Industry, who I saw a representative here, and certainly the Regional Business Council. I'd also like to thank Mo Source Link, who's providing a look at the new job creation data for St. Louis, and Dr. Sarah Coffin, I believe Sarah's here, who's providing data on changes in the advanced manufacturing sector. I can't wait. We've got some great panelists that we're going to have here with you today, and I can't wait to hear from them in a few minutes. But kicking us off here, I'd like to introduce our longest and closest partner with this effort, the St. Louis Business Journal, led by market president and publisher Robert Bobroff. Let's join me in welcoming Robert.
Thank you, Dr. Pittman. Good morning, everyone. St. Louis Business Journal is once again proud to be partnering with St. Louis Community College on this annual workforce event that is so important to our community. This is always one of my favorite events of the year. I always enjoy hearing the survey results and seeing how they compare to years past because workforce is the backbone of business. And it's a topic that's very near and dear to us at the Business Journal. In fact, earlier this year, the St. Louis Business Journal dedicated the entire March 31st issue to workforce development. We called it our Workforce Development Guide, and we partnered with St. Louis Community College on that as well. It's very rare that a business journal dedicate an entire issue to just one topic, and the fact that we did so kind of is a testament to how important workforce development is for our community. That guide was so successful that as of right now, there's close to 20 business journals in our chain across the country that are producing their own workforce guide, just like this one. So the St. Louis Community College should be commended for their continued efforts to move our region forward around this topic. Dr. Pittman, thank you again for giving us an opportunity to be a part of today's program. And now, if you would please join me in welcoming to the stage Charles Gascon, Senior Economist for the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis.
Thank you for having me today. I'm going to kind of set the lay of the land before we get into the details here. I'm going to talk about current economic conditions in the region and nationally. But before I do so, I think there's really two big themes that really are going to underpin a lot of what we're going to hear about today. The first is this big divergence that we've seen over the last, we'll call it century, between what's going on in manufacturing output and the goods that we're producing and trends in employment. So I'm going to dive a little bit into that. And then I'm going to talk about the unprecedented speed of the U.S. economic recovery and how that's really still playing out in the world that we see it today. So we'll start with the U.S. and regional economy, and then talk about some of the current trends in manufacturing, and then I'm going to share the outlook. So from 1940 to the present, we saw this period from about 1940 to 1980 where manufacturing, output, employment basically moved lockstep, one for one. So as output increased in the sector, we saw firms hiring a lot more workers and employment increased. Then around 1980, we saw the reverse take place. So basically, output and manufacturing continued to increase all the way through to about 2010, but employment in manufacturing declined. So what's happening during this period in time is that firms are getting more productive. They're finding ways to produce more higher value-added products with either the same number of workers or with fewer workers in some cases. Then we get to this most recent recovery around 2010, and you see this nice resurgence in manufacturing employment, but unfortunately it's not accompanied with an increase in output. So what's happening here is firms are struggling to become more productive. They're maintaining output, but they're doing so by hiring more and more workers. So this is some of the declines that we saw in the capital stock in the country, but also some compositional shifts in what was being produced. As we came out of this last recession in 2020, we saw a resurgence in manufacturing, and it was accompanied by a resurgence in employment in the manufacturing sector. So it's, like I said, it's really important to understand that there is a disconnect between how much firms are producing and not necessarily how many workers they're employing. These things can change based on the investment strategies that are taking place in this sector. Second big point that I think is really important to take away in thinking about the world that we're living in today is just how fast of a recovery that we've had in the U.S. economy and in the regional economy. I'm showing this with the unemployment rate, so this is the share of people that are looking for a job that are out of work. But I could show you this in many different economic indicators, and the picture would be about the same. I highlighted 1982 to 1984 because that was the steepest decline in the unemployment rate we ever had in history prior to 2020. If we saw that recovery, that 1982-84 recovery during this period, we would still have an unemployment rate nationally that was about 8% or 7.9%. We're at 3.5% nationally and 2.9% unemployment rate. 2.9% of people are out of work and looking for a job. These are unprecedentedly low numbers, and they came in during a period that we had some of the highest numbers on record. So this was just a really, really fast recovery, and it's still impacting how the economy is shaping today. When we turn to growth and output, there's some delays in the data that we have regionally. So you'll see I have a dashed line in here for the St. Louis area. These are my estimates based on a wide variety of different economic data. But nationally, what we've seen is that the economy slowed in the last year or so, but still growing at a pretty healthy rate. Similarly, the Missouri and the St. Louis economy have continued to slow. from that really strong recovery that we saw during the 2021 and 2022, to about half a percentage point, just shy of 1% growth in the most recent quarter. That's more or less consistent with trend growth for the region, as we have really slow or stagnant population growth. Most of the gains that we're seeing are coming from productivity gains and some gains in the labor force and people coming back into work. But overall growth is kind of getting back to this long run average trend. So we got this record economic recovery, and a lot of it happened from a combination of pandemic savings that was built up when people were sitting at home and they couldn't spend money, and then transfer payments coming from the government that in many cases were also saved. And then as people unleashed that savings on the economy, it created this huge demand for goods and services, and that excess savings is still in the economy today, but it has been winding down. So if you look at this chart here, you can kind of take that shape, that area between that dashed line and the blue line, that is the excess savings that built up. It was over $2 trillion. We're still looking at a little bit shy of $1 trillion in excess savings sitting there in households' balance sheets. Households are also, their wealth levels are a lot higher today than they were back in 2019 as well. So this is providing a pretty good foundation for growth as we move forward. Looking at spending, this is where we saw this really strong drive towards goods during the pandemic, and you can see that it really still is persisting today. So consumption of durable goods is up 30% from 2019 levels. What I mean by durable goods, this is like refrigerators, other household appliances, as well as cars and things that you're going to keep for a long period of time. Furniture would be another example here. You can see that durable goods consumption surged, and this is adjusted for changes in prices. So these are units of goods, not necessarily just because people were paying more money on these goods. But our service sectors really struggled to recover during the last couple of years, although there has been a pivot back in recent months. You can kind of see this if you look at that non-durable goods. A lot of that's going to be kind of like food services or food that you may buy at home versus going out to a restaurant. That would be a service. So that's where you see some of that pullback on non-durable goods consumption, but maybe an increase in services consumption going forward. But overall spending is remaining pretty healthy in the economy today. On the global supply chain scale, this is an index that was created by some of our colleagues at the New York Fed. It's telling you if supply chains are getting more constrained or less constrained. So the way you can kind of interpret this is that we need this part down here to remain negative for about the same amount of time that it remained positive before we ever get to a place where supply chains are back to normal. So they're improving, but they're far from where they were pre-COVID times. But the disruptions are easing in some ways, and we're getting back to something of a new normal. So when you combine that all together, we have a situation where we have really strong demand because households had a lot of money, they were buying a lot more services, and then supply chains were constrained due to many factors related to the pandemic and other related issues. And so that resulted in record high inflation. So we've had prices increasing upwards of 9% last year, and even the most recent numbers put overall price increases at just above 3% right now. And they're expected to kind of remain at that level here into the foreseeable future. So again, this is continued increases in prices. This is not kind of a return back to kind of normal price levels that we saw in 2019. It's prices where they are today increasing about 3% year over year. On the producer side of things, we have seen some reprieve, and producer prices have generally been flat to kind of up a little bit slightly over the last year. So that is some reprieve that we're seeing on the producer side of things. On the labor market, job growth has been really strong. About 200,000 jobs a month is what we consider to be a really strong labor market. You can see from 2011 to 2019, the economy averaged just shy of that. The last couple of readings have continued to be really, really strong. So I think you can say that, through July, the economy continues to perform really well. Looking regionally, there's two things that I want you to take away here. First of all, you can kind of see how the regional economy rebounded much quicker than the national economy from the pandemic. As kind of in this area, you'll see the rebound in Missouri and St. Louis was much stronger. But then as we're moving further out away from that pandemic recovery, the older workforce that we have in this region and the slower labor force growth is really inhibiting the growth rate of the regional economy going forward. And that's also, to a great extent, coming into play at the national economy as we move forward. So job growth numbers are expected to slow down quite significantly over kind of the medium and long run horizon. Looking at manufacturing, the data look pretty good, and this kind of is more or less consistent with what we saw on that earlier chart I showed you, which is manufacturing employment has recovered quite strongly in the region, as well as across the state as a whole. A lot of what's driving this gap between St. Louis and the Missouri is coming out of the Kansas City area. I didn't really get a chance to look into it that closely, but broadly speaking across the state, manufacturing activity has been very strong, and in some cases employment numbers have picked up as well. Again, I would just want to remind you that there is a disconnect between trends in employment and trends in output. So while manufacturing employment in other parts of the state may be growing much stronger, that doesn't necessarily mean that the sector in the region is producing output or growing their output at a slower rate. It could just be composition effects as to the types of goods that are being produced and how much labor is needed in some of these cases. Now, firms are facing relatively weaker demand for goods, and that is starting to show up in the production numbers that we're looking at. This industrial production series was just released this morning, and the numbers were better than expected. So that is a bright spot. But you can see kind of there was a strong resurgence, and now production across the country has basically been relatively flat over the last year. And a lot of this is happening because motor vehicle production is starting to come back, but still trying to ramp up in some cases. And particularly on those non-durable goods side of things, that production slowed pretty significantly. The one bright spot for producers, at least, has been that their order backlogs still remain pretty healthy. So while new order flows coming in are not necessarily as strong as they were a year ago, what we are seeing is that there's still a backlog in orders that are allowing firms to produce at relatively high levels. And what pulled back a lot of this production for some manufacturers was a slowdown in the housing market. So if you think about the kind of things that were produced for construction purposes, as construction really slowed down last year, that ultimately spilled over to the manufacturing sector and slowed down some of those new orders coming in. But again, still getting caught up, and that's keeping those production numbers in good shape. Here's the new orders and shipments data, so you can kind of get a sense of where things are at. And again, you see the strong recovery coming out of the pandemic, and then durable goods orders really peaked back in 2022, and then they've slowly drifted off. There is this resurgence right here. A lot of what's going on there is aircraft orders coming in. So as aircraft orders come in, I've included them in this chart, and you can see those aircraft orders have been really strong. Auto orders also would be relatively strong. But the shipment numbers also really relatively flat over the last part of the year. So we are seeing some stagnation on the manufacturing side, broadly speaking, outside of those things like cars and aircraft. And that really gets to a lot of the reasons that people have been talking about recession over the last, say, year and a half or two, which is typically when we see the housing market slow down and construction activity slow down, and then producers really stabilize their production, or in some cases they dip off, that's a sign that the broader economy is going to slow down. But what's different right now is the fact that we've had this big pivot back to the service sector, and people are going on vacation instead of buying stuff, broadly speaking. So our service sector is remaining really healthy, and that's really helping prop stuff up. But also note that recessions are incredibly difficult to predict. As you can see in this chart, these are professional forecasters' odds of a decline in output for the next quarter, so just 3 months ahead of time. And normally before recessions, they still have odds less than 10%. So a lot of these signals of what was happening in the manufacturing construction sector spilled over in these traditional models and really elevated recession fears. But I think as we're getting more and more information of what's going on in the economy, those fears are slowly starting to abate, particularly as inflation has come back down. And there are some signs now that the housing market's starting to come back as well. So home construction and multifamily construction seems to be moving in the right direction through July. So that was a bright spot. So getting to the forecasts, the top lines are going to be from my bosses at the FOMC and their projections that they released back in May. So new projections will be coming out here in a couple of months. And their projections are broadly speaking for a soft landing for the U.S. economy. So they expect growth rate at the end of this year to be around 1%, so slowing in the third and fourth quarters, but again, positive economic growth. Inflation rate more or less flat to where it is today, so kind of moving sideways as we see some easing on some price pressures, but in the case of like gasoline, we saw some energy prices start to move up. The unemployment rate's currently at 3.5% nationally. Again, with growth slowing, you'd expect the labor market conditions to ease up a little bit and get back to more normal levels of unemployment. And interest rates remaining more or less where they're at right now. So mapping that outlook to the St. Louis economy, there's a couple of things that I take in mind. One is that structurally, the regional economy just tends to grow slower than the national average. There's been very few periods in our history where the St. Louis economy's grown faster than the U.S. average. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we just have generally slower in population growth. And the sectors that are driving economic growth, particularly healthcare sector, just tends to grow at a slower pace, but a steady pace going forward. So my expectation is that we'll see growth probably around 0.5 percentage point, maybe a little bit slower than that by the end of this year, which I'd put broadly consistent with below trend growth. And so that we'd expect our unemployment rate to rise a little bit as a result of that. On the inflation front, the main difference between the U.S. economy and the national economy is housing inflation. So what we're seeing in the region is rent prices are still rising as they are in many other parts of the country, but we've seen more stabilization on the housing market and stabilization of rent prices. So that's ultimately going to pass through into a slightly lower inflation rate on the regional side of things. So just to wrap up, I mean, broadly speaking, the data indicate that the economy continues to expand through July. Like I said, the production numbers that came out today were really good. The economy added almost 200,000 jobs. So far this year, it actually has been quite strong and much better than many people expected. I think if you looked at the beginning of this year, 2023 was expected to be a recessionary year with a probably steep downturn in the economy because of what we saw in the housing market. And that really just hasn't come to fruition, and forecasts continue to get marked up. There still is a forecast for slower growth ahead. As I mentioned, there's this kind of backlog of orders that's keeping production up. If the housing market doesn't recover quick enough to really kind of continue to push more activity to the manufacturing sector, get people to buy new houses, which is really a trigger for a lot of consumption. You don't just buy a house. You buy a house and then you fill it with stuff. So filling it with all that stuff, I was going to use a different S word, but I caught myself. It's all that other stuff that really drives consumption. So if the housing market can come back, I think that'll be a nice boom for the rest of the year. But again, that weakness is really weakening the outlook right now. So why would we still have a little bit of pessimism? Well, on the inflation front, inflation has come down from that 9% number that we saw about a year ago to but it's still elevated. I mean, prices are still rising well above 3% a year, and that's not consistent with price stability. So that has the risk of having policymakers needing to push interest rates even higher. And then also we've seen some tightening in credit conditions, and that has the ability to restrain household and business investment. So we'll have to see kind of how the credit conditions situation plays out as the banking sector kind of is working through some of the turmoil that we saw earlier on in the spring. Reasons for optimism: housing market bottomed out and it's showing signs of improvement. Labor constraints are easing. We are hearing from a lot of firms that they're having an easier time hiring workers than they did maybe a year ago. And participation rates are also moving back up. So we're seeing people coming off the sidelines that have been sitting there in many cases for 6 months to a year and actively looking for work. And then nationally, the immigration rates have come back from the pandemic, and we're starting to see an influx of immigrants coming back into the country at the level that we expected to see kind of prior to the pandemic, but they really stopped during 2022 and 2021. And then low unemployment rates. If people have jobs and they're seeing healthy wage gains and they have money to spend, they'll spend that money, and that is really going to be the driver of consumer spending. So overall, I think there are some decent signs of optimism, even in a situation where we've seen the outlook continue to improve over the course of the year. So with that, I'm anxiously awaiting the results of this survey. So I'll pass it on.
A big thank you to Charles again. Let's give him another round of applause. I always appreciate the perspective from the Federal Reserve and it being presented in such a way that it makes sense. I've dragged some past employees to talks from the Fed, and sometimes it's dragging people and they come away going, I understood that. So I really appreciate the perspective that he was able to share. Welcome to the State of the St. Louis Workforce Report. As Dr. Pittman said, it's our 15th year and always something new and a different perspective that we have to bring based on what we're hearing from our employers in the region. So we will step into it here because we have a lot of ground to cover. First, I do want to thank our partners again. Without them, we would not have the data, and we're excited to be able to share everything with you. I also want to thank the staff of the Workforce Solutions Group, many of whom you have seen tonight in their St. Louis Community College attire. Without them, this report and this event wouldn't have happened either, so a big thank you to them. We've made some changes on the report this year, so whenever you actually download it, you'll find some things, for instance, that it's skinnier. It's a little bit thinner. When I get bored and tired of reading my own writing, 80 pages in, I know that other people will too. So we narrowed down the report so it's a little more focused, a little easier to digest, hopefully. And so later today, by the end of today, you will have a link in your mailbox so you can download the full report and be able to see additional data from what we present today. There will be 4 parts that we talk about in the report. We have the St. Louis economy, which we traditionally cover, the employer survey. This is the 15th year for that again, and employers in our region to hear about what happened over the last year and what the forecast is. We have our spotlight on startups and job creation, and then we have our special focus areas, our spotlight on advanced manufacturing. And after my talk, you'll be able to, we'll shift to the panel discussion and hear about the trends and some exciting new things that are happening in our region around advanced manufacturing. First, we're going to look at the economy and the workforce of St. Louis. Just for perspective, the population in the St. Louis metropolitan statistical area and the counties that are on the St. Louis and Missouri side of our region is about 2.8 million people. The workforce within that region is 1.3 million. So whenever we're seeing statistics here, you can kind of run that through 1.3 million and how many people is that really? Charles has already talked a little bit about the unemployment rate here. We have been running about 2.6 to 2.7% in the region. And as you can see, we're a little below national levels and we're a little higher than the Missouri state levels. But unemployment doesn't look the same for everyone. Here in this chart, you're looking at how age impacts unemployment. Age also correlates to things like experience and the opportunity to have had some education, and those sorts of things can impact your employability. There's other pieces that we look at as well. For instance, if you are, for male and female, unemployment has been running about the same, no dramatic changes, which is a great recovery out of the recession when unemployment, especially for women, spiked dramatically when schools were shut down. Other things we look at is looking at demographics. So by race, unemployment for whites tends to be 2.5% to 3.5% over the last 6 months. It's about the same for our Asian workers. For our Hispanic workers, that number starts to inch up to about 4.5% to 6% unemployment rates. And for our Black population, it moves even higher to 5% to 6.5% over the last 6 months. When we look at workers that have disabilities, the unemployment rate moves even higher, and that's 6% to 9%. So we really do have to look and recognize that even though the labor market has been tight, there are opportunities for us to be addressing employment in different sectors. What you see on this chart is, if you look at the right 2 sets of bars, which would be a bachelor's degree or higher, that is about 37% of our workforce. If you look at the left 2 sets of bars, it's a high school diploma or less in education. That's 33% of our workforce. And then in the middle, you have the remaining 30%, which is some level of education or training, but less than a 4-year degree. It's really an interesting way to look at those 3 different buckets. We're really fortunate to have the level of higher education here in the region that we do, because employers tend to look at that when they're looking at relocating their business to a different city. So we're fortunate with that. The reality is, though, that we have 63% of our population does not have a degree. That is a lot of opportunity for us to look at where can we make sure that those individuals are in jobs that with family sustaining wages. Where can we move them into short-term training or something less than four-year education that can move their career along and give them a satisfying career path. Again, 1.3 million people and 63%, we have a lot of opportunity there. You start to look at the impact of education on things like unemployment and salary. You can see the numbers from Missouri as well as from the St. Louis MSA. It's a direct correlation. Unemployment is higher the less education that you have, and your salaries go up the more education that you have. There's really no way around that. Finding different opportunities and the most efficient means of training and education can be our challenge, and making sure that people can find that rather than perhaps stagnate in roles that don't give them opportunities. And looking at our workforce, Charles mentioned this, the aging workforce, and it's something that we're seeing more and more. I think it's also something that's easy to ignore a little bit unless you really look at the numbers. When you look at the region here, we have an aging workforce, and you can see here a pretty dramatic drop-off in birth rates. So the incoming workforce is much smaller than the workforce that's going to be retiring. This is a fundamental shift in how we look at what we're doing. 20 years from now, we cannot produce the same level of goods and services that we are today unless we're changing either our business processes or introducing technology so that we can produce more with fewer people. We're looking at 45% of our workforce aging out in the next 20 years. That's a big number. Finally, when we look at the St. Louis economy, we have to look at the industries that are represented. Healthcare is our biggest sector. We have almost 220,000 workers working in that industry, and over the last decade, we're seeing a 15% growth rate. So it continues to grow and be a significant presence here. Our economy is fairly well diversified. These are the top 10 industries, and that covers 91% of the workers in our region. So we are spread across a number of industries. The top 4 industries, healthcare, wholesale and retail trade, leisure and hospitality, and manufacturing, those top 4 employ just over half of our workforce. So you can see where the concentration of jobs are and where the training needs to be as well. Next, we're going to move into our survey. There are employer surveys done each year focusing directly on the employers in our region. This isn't just a national survey. This year we interviewed 600 companies across the region, and I want to thank any of those that might be present because it's a long survey. It's a 20-minute phone call, and we really appreciate the time and effort that they put into this because it gives us some great data and views about our region. We're also looking at the companies that we're surveying from a true representation of our region in terms of the industries and in terms of the size of companies and also the geography and where those companies are located. Most of the survey respondents have fewer than 50 employees, which is really representative of our region again. We don't tend to think about that. The news tends to show our bigger companies and not necessarily the many, many smaller companies that we have. First, we ask our companies what happened in their hiring over the last year. Over the last 12 months, the companies surveyed about 30% hired, 16% cut employees, and about half of the employers didn't make a change. When we look forward to next year, we ask the companies what their plans are moving forward. 46% plan to hire, only 4% plan to cut, and again, a big chunk in the middle are choosing not to make any significant changes. We do tend to see that companies are more optimistic looking forward, and when we look at the reality, a year later, perhaps the hiring trends have been a little bit less, and perhaps a few more companies may have let go. The next question on the survey is around our businesses experiencing a shortage of skilled applicants. 46% of the companies reported yes. It's still a big number, but it's a big drop from the last 2 years. So that's really reassuring to see, even as tight as the labor market has been. We also ask our companies about the barriers to growth. What are the things that are keeping them from growing when it comes to their workforce? The shortage of workers with knowledge or skills is almost always the #1 response, and it is again this year. Though again, it's a big drop from 2021, which is the blue bar that's represented here. We're starting to get closer to returning to the pre-pandemic levels, which is really reassuring. The next two items that you see here are the economic conditions and the government regulations, substantial drops compared to a couple years ago in terms of employers that are concerned about these as barriers to growth. And the bottom two trends here, lack of transportation and lack of childcare, unfortunately, stay about the same. And this is something, looking back historically, it just doesn't move dramatically. This is a concern for the employers in terms of growth. And if it's a concern for employers, it has to be an even bigger stress for the workers in our region. We also look at how companies are adding their employees. It's been pretty consistent here for a number of years that they're hiring full-time workers. It sounds kind of obvious, but there are times in the past when bringing people off of furloughs, contract workers and that sort of thing are more predominant. What we're seeing right now is the main goal of bringing in part-time and full-time workers so that they're on staff permanently. What measures are being taken to address the skill shortages? 59% of the companies are forced to hire less experienced workers and train them. When you don't have very many applicants for your job postings, I think a lot of us can relate to this. When you don't have very many choices, you take the best choice, and that may not be the most experienced person that you would really prefer. Companies are also continuing to offer, almost half the companies are offering increased wages, frankly poaching off other companies. But that's the state of the game these days. A very popular question that we've had for a number of years is, what are the shortcomings that companies are seeing in the applicants? Poor work habits, still #1, it is every year. Surprisingly this year, the second one, lack of general business knowledge, has moved up over the last couple of years. It's been much lower on the list. This is something that's a little more teachable and a little easier to get your hands around in terms of what training can accomplish there. The rest of these on the list, lack of communication skills, lack of critical thinking, lack of creativity, on down the list, are all of those soft skills or essential skills that really make an employee much more likely to be successful in their job, and sometimes they're much harder to identify the training that needs to go with them. St. Louis Community College and our workforce programs, we embed most of these soft skills in some of the training that we do to make sure that people are taking these new skills with them into the workforce. More positive spin on this is looking at the strengths that are seen in job applicants. And fortunately, these numbers are fairly high as well from the companies that responded in the survey. Respectfulness, honesty, positivity, verbal communication skills is fairly high on here. So all of those are good, and it's nice to see the positive side of this too, and not only the half-empty side. When it comes to training workers or increasing skills for workers that may already be a part of your company, this was a bit of a shift this year. On-the-job training, 80% of our companies responded that is their primary method. That's an increase over past years, and everything else on this list is down significantly. To me, it says that our companies are struggling to get things out the door. So when you have an employee come in, they need to be put to work as quickly as possible. So more often than not, they're training on the floor or at the desk rather than going off to significant amounts of training first. I will put a slight plug in here for the very far 10% option that's presented here. Community colleges providing customized training or education. Most employers in our region don't realize that they can work with the community colleges in our region to develop training customized especially for what that company needs. And some of it can be very technical and very specific. So slight plug, please reach out to your community colleges. When we look at educational skill levels tied to jobs, high-skilled jobs are tied, is describing our 4-year degrees or higher. Our middle-skilled jobs would require some training and education, but less than a 4-year. And low-skilled jobs would be a high school diploma or less. When we look at our business functional areas, you can see that there's definitely a need in certain industries like IT and accounting for the high-skill type of education. Most notably, though, every single functional area that's listed here has over 40% of their job opportunities that only require some training or education. That some training or education can put workers on a path, a career path, a better path than an hourly rate job. And so we need to be focusing on where we can help our workers skill up into those areas. Also looking at the areas that firms are reporting applicant shortages, some of these are not surprising. Skilled trades and manufacturing, we have an aging workforce, and also sometimes a perception issue that these are well-paid jobs and that they're not always grubby and on dirty shop floors, frankly. Patient care, it's our healthcare system, and those workers really took a beating during COVID. So we have a lot of turnover there, a lot of burnout, and people that were reaching out for different occupations. Also, it takes a couple of years to train people to be in a lot of our healthcare jobs. And the middle one that's noted here, customer service. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more later. But customer service workers took the brunt of layoffs during the pandemic. And so many of them have decided to go a different path and not leave themselves at risk again for layoffs that may have impacted their family financially in a really harsh way. When it comes to sourcing talent, the companies in the survey reported, and this is a big one, the number one place that they went was nonprofit organizations. This is a big change because for as long as I can remember, the top answer has been 4-year colleges. And this year that dropped to 4th. That's a significant change. So to see nonprofit organizations and 4-year colleges flip their place here is significant. So the top 3 being nonprofit organizations, 2-year colleges, and school districts. And here in the region, we have a number of interesting programs aimed at high school seniors. Access Point draws on high school seniors and puts them into coding classes and includes an internship, so they have that hands-on experience before they're even done with high school. Gateway Global is training our high school workers in geospatial technology. And the Boeing pre-employment program at the community college here has extended to high school seniors as well. And so by the time they finish high school, they can be ready to be interviewing with Boeing for a line on the airline production floor. It is super important right now that we are focusing on our young workers and making sure that they understand what their choices are. The reality is that most of us know the industries best that our family members and friends work in. And so when you look at different parts of our community, we may not have great opportunities for some students to really understand what their choices are. So companies have been going into schools and sharing, even at elementary and middle school levels. All of these responses, though, are down from last year. So that's a struggle. I think some of this has to do with the fact that companies are a little tight in terms of their hiring, and all of this takes time. All of this takes hours out of someone's day to be coaching an intern, to be going out and doing a classroom presentation. But it's really important for our students to have these. I will make my plug again, as I do every year, unpaid internships. Not cool. We need to pay our interns. We also talk to our companies about what screening checks they may be having. These are barriers to employment for our workers, and these are across the board. Criminal checks, drug screens, social media checks. All of these are less than they have been in the past, Again, it's a tight labor market. Companies can't be quite as choosy perhaps, and so they're not doing quite as many screens as they have. But these screens tend to be across a company. They tend to be pretty standard, and they are still consistent here. We also need to remind perhaps our youngest workers that just because some drugs are legal doesn't mean that employers need someone on them when they're doing things like building planes or cars. So still relevant and important for all of our workers to understand. We also ask our companies about whether they will employ justice-involved individuals. This has remained fairly consistent over time, and this is a real challenge. We have a significant number of, Missouri has one of the highest incarceration rates in the country. So we have a number of people that are currently incarcerated, which also means that we have a number of people that leave our prison system, and we have to figure out ways to get them employed. You can see the numbers here. Some companies will consider it, some it depends on the job. Some would consider for anything, and I think it's something we have to be conscious of in our hiring policies and not just use it as a screening tool, especially as we move forward and we have a smaller workforce. It's one of my favorite questions. I think it's one of the most fascinating things out of COVID. Employees working remotely. It's a hot topic still. I think every organization struggles to find the right sweet spot for this. I think every worker struggles to find the right sweet spot for it as well. About 23% of the companies that responded have workers that are working remotely, employees that are working remotely. Nationally, the number of days worked remotely is about 30%, so almost a third. When you compare that to pre-COVID, that was 6%. So we're 5 times as many days worked from home as we did in 2019. There are reports out there as well that show that productivity can go up for people that are working from home, that use it well, as I like to say. And a third of employees that are working remotely are less likely to quit, because it gives them that flexibility. Excuse me. When you look at this nationally, recent surveys are showing that 42% of companies are fully back in the office. About 30% of companies are hybrid, most of them back in the office 2 to 3 days a week, and 28%, so a slightly higher number, are fully flexible and employees can work wherever they wish. So interesting, and I think, you'll see on the next slide here, was we asked companies, do they expect to change this here in the St. Louis region? 75% don't expect to make a change, and 13%, about equal numbers, expect to either increase or decrease that and are still working towards finding that right spot. The question that's on the left here, the characteristics of a good job. We've asked this as part of our survey for a number of years, and these are the top 5. There's about 12 different choices that are given, but we picked the top 5. Pay rate, job stability, health insurance, inclusiveness or a sense of belonging, paid time off or sick leave. This is from the perspective of the employer. That's who we're asking in the survey. And this year, fortunately, because I've always wondered, well, what is it from the employee perspective? Is it the same thing? And the Federal Reserve has done a study over the last 2 years called Worker Voices, Shifting Perspective and Expectations on Employment. The econ geek in me gets excited when this stuff comes out. So being able to compare the top 5 there as compared to the employer perspective, they're a little different. The Fed report is focused on workers that were displaced or I would say suffered, frankly, during the pandemic. A number of them are focused in the service industry. So for them, job stability was number 1 by far. And I don't think we had quite as much of a number 1 point on the employer side. But job stability is number 1. People felt like they had no control over whether they were going to have a job, and they wanted to change that. And so a lot of those service workers or people that were let go, or even frontline workers that may have been employed but didn't have any flexibility, are looking at different jobs that give them different stability. Flexibility as well. Again, some of those frontline workers didn't have a choice, and they recognized a need maybe for different family time, or for even more life balance than what they had had before. Having a career pathway, not just a job, but a job they can grow in and move forward in their career. A pay rate that matches responsibilities, and job satisfaction. So interesting to see those compared to each other. The next part of our report today is our spotlight on startups. Many of you know that I've been in the startup community for a very long time, been at the college for about a year and a half. This data does not exist anywhere in the St. Louis region. So I'm thrilled that we can add this to our viewpoint of where jobs are created here in the region. All net new jobs in St. Louis, in Missouri, in the country, come from startups. Larger companies, corporations, are designed to introduce efficiencies and to produce more with fewer resources. Startups are where the new jobs come from. St. Louis region last year added 15,313 new jobs, first-time jobs that were introduced by first-time startups. It's a pretty narrow look at it, but 15,000 jobs for a region is significant. When you look at jobs across Missouri, it's about 40,000 new jobs a year. And there are years that if you took those out of the picture, Missouri would have had a net job loss. When you look over the last 8 years, which is the time that the data has been reported, the last 5 years we've been running upper 14,000 to 15,000. Again, these are new jobs every single year. You're not just building off the previous year. So it's new jobs, I like to say again, every year. These the ones from 2022 came from about 77 startups in the region. So this is the first time that a startup is hiring a worker. So if you're out doing work on your own, you're the single shingle, maybe you're doing taxes or something, but you don't have paid employees, you're not in this number. If you've been around and you've hired employees before, you're not in this number. This is looking specifically at who hired their first employees. Since 2015, a total of 56,000 startups in the St. Louis region have hired over 118,000 workers as first-time employees. That's a huge number. 118,000 happens to be the size of our fourth largest industry employer in the region, which is advanced manufacturing. So it's a significant contribution to the region. When we look at where startups are coming from, they're in every industry, every single industry, even those with high barriers to growth, like manufacturing, utilities, that sort of thing. I'll point out here the fourth one down, professional, scientific, and technical services. This is an area where we tend to hear about startups that are in the news. These companies tend to be funded by venture capital or equity investment. They're higher growth, they're higher to market, they're a little sexier and splashier, and we hear about them more often. Since 2015, they've added almost 8,800 jobs to our region, and these especially tend to be higher paying jobs and definitely higher than the national average. Our last section, we're almost there, our spotlight on advanced manufacturing. These are the top 5 industries that we have in the region here. Advanced manufacturing has 118,700 jobs in our region. It's a significant employer, and in the last decade, that employment has grown by over 9%. We have big employers here in the region. We know some of the big names. We see those in the paper. There's a lot of smaller manufacturing employers as well. And the last slide, we're getting close, people. Looking at the subsectors within the advanced manufacturing industry, the top 5 subsectors here in the region would be transportation equipment, which includes planes and cars, machinery manufacturing, chemical manufacturing, fabricated metal product manufacturing, and food manufacturing. The yellow bar is the national growth rate of these over the last decade, and you can see especially in transportation equipment, St. Louis has outperformed the employment growth rate compared to the national numbers. Same in machinery. The rest of them, smaller or slight decreases, but we have a strong workforce here, and we're very fortunate because it's an ecosystem. It's not only our big companies that are part of what's going on here. Our workers tend to migrate through small companies and large companies. And so those skill sets that we're training for and the experience that people have are applicable in so many different companies here. I am thrilled that we are going to be having our panel next. The topic is around the future of advanced manufacturing. We have some fascinating things going on here in the industry, and we'll be inviting them to the stage in just a moment. I just want to remind everyone, you'll get an email today with the link to the full report. Please take a look at it. Within the next week, you'll also have a link to the video of today's talks, so if you want to share that with any colleagues, please do that. As you walk out today, you will also see, you get a preview copy of the wrap from the Business Journal, and charts from today's presentation, as well as some of the information on advanced manufacturing are on the wraps. Make sure you grab one of those on the way out. If you get the Business Journal, you'll see it again on Friday. And now I would like to invite to the stage our panel on advanced manufacturing, and led by Dr. Pittman. Thank you so much.
Well, hello again. I hope you enjoyed seeing all that data as much as I did, and some shifting things going on right now. As you can tell, we're seeing a lot of change occurring in the St. Louis region. So I really always look forward to this opportunity to have panelists here and to hear all their expertise. So I'll start out here by introducing these folks. And Chauncey, I'll start with you, and then we'll give each of you a little bit of time to talk a little bit about what you do. Chauncey Nelson, he will be to your far left, is President and CEO of Gateway South Innovation District. Welcome, Chauncey. Corey Matthews is CEO of the Advanced Manufacturing Innovation Center of St. Louis. Really glad to have you here. And then Kevin Webb, welcome. Kevin is the Chief Operating Officer of the API Innovation Center. API stands for Advanced Pharmaceutical Ingredients. So we're very blessed to have this level of expertise here with us. And we'll have some questions for each of you, but I would encourage this to be a conversation. If you hear a question you would like to chime in on, please do so. So we'll get started here. I'll set the background a little bit. I think when you think of advanced manufacturing right now, it's so different than maybe what people's perspectives of what manufacturing was. You know, when you think back in the day of old, dimly lit buildings, greasy floors, not very efficient, things have really changed in the advanced manufacturing world. And we've seen in the last 10 years, an 8% growth in advanced manufacturing. I don't know if you caught that slide up there when Phyllis presented it. That's 118,000 workers in the St. Louis MSA. I mean, that is a major part of our economy. St. Louis has had a consistent presence in manufacturing throughout its history. Even through decades of mergers or offshoring, we've been able to maintain our key employers here and certainly are adding others. And just recently, announcements of major advanced manufacturing wins in the past 2 years amount to nearly $5 billion, that's billion with a B, in investment and 2,300 new jobs from companies including Boeing, ICL, General Motors, American Foods Group, James Hardie, and MEMC. All right, let's learn a little bit more about our panelists and what they do. And Kevin, I'll start with you. Could you tell us a little bit about your organization and your role in advanced manufacturing?
Thank you, Dr. Pittman, and good morning, everyone. It is certainly a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation. My name is Kevin Webb. I am the Chief Operating Officer of the API Innovation Center. For context, to Dr. Pittman's point, API are active pharmaceutical ingredients, also known as advanced pharmaceutical ingredients. If any of you have taken a medication, either by prescription or over the counter, the active ingredient, or that which gives the drug its therapeutic value, you take Tylenol to relieve pain, the active ingredient in that is acetaminophen. That is what allows the medication to do what it's supposed to do. Most of our medications are made overseas. And actually, most of these medications we take in the United States, over 83% of our drugs here are what we call generic drugs. 93% are generic drugs. Most of those drugs are sourced outside of the United States. That API is coming from China or India. That in itself has created a heightened sense of awareness, not only from a public health concern and risk, but also in the interest of national security. So the API Innovation Center is a 501(c) nonprofit public benefit corporation. Our charter is to identify critical medicines, those of you in this room or your families who may be taking, that then are reliant on another country to provide that medication to you. Our goal then is to bring that medication back to the United States, but then transition away from the traditional way of making drugs to use advanced manufacturing capabilities. As we'll get into today's presentation, there's a significant amount of advantages to doing that, but our goal is to make sure that as the public health is concerned, we are manufacturing those drugs here in the United States, specifically in the state of Missouri.
All right, thanks, Kevin. Corey Matthews with the Advanced Manufacturing Innovation Center. We'll shorten to AMIC going forward here. So.
There you go. Well, first off, and I'll reiterate what Kevin said. Dr. Pittman, Phyllis, thanks for the invitation, and thanks for the labor of love, really, in the St. Louis workforce and the state of that. It is unbelievably important. And so the Advanced Manufacturing Innovation Center, or AMIC, really is centered on two key objectives. First off is to build on the legacy of manufacturing in this region and expand and strengthen that ecosystem that Phyllis talked about. Our goal in that is to no doubt make St. Louis as a region or the epicenter for advanced manufacturing across a multitude of sectors. And then secondly is to be a catalyst for equitable and strong growth in the region. Now, how do we do that? Similar to the APIC, we are established as a 501(c)(3) nonprofit. We work across multiple sectors, 8 to be specific. I often get the question, well, is this an aerospace thing? And I saw Randall and John here earlier from Boeing. Yes, it is, but it's so much more than that. It's a yes and to that. Everything from the biotech and life sciences in partnership with APIC, energy, transportation, yes, aerospace, and construction in partnership with the Gateway South project. Multiple sectors, 3 key work streams. First off is workforce development, looking holistically in partnership with so many entities that provide excellent training in the region, using that entire spectrum that Phyllis talked about how we provide training to ensure that we have a robust pipeline of high qualified, highly skilled workforce for now and in the future that meets industry needs. Second is a collaborative R&D program across all of those sectors between research universities and industry partners across a wide array of technologies and capabilities. And then finally is providing state-of-the-art manufacturing space, state-of-the-art equipment, and staff to support industry, whether it's startup or a mature industry partner here in the region, in their pursuit of production process and product prototyping, and do that in an affordable manner. So that's what we're about with AMIC.
All right, thanks, Corey. And we're proud to partner with AMIC and look forward to your leadership and the years to come of that organization. All right, Chauncey Nelson with the Gateway South Innovation District.
So I want to first ditto what Kevin and Corey just said. So thank you, Dr. Pittman, for inviting us here today to speak on this topic, which is super important for our region in general, and also to Phyllis and the team and my fellow panelists here on this morning. So first, let's start with what Gateway South is. So Gateway South is a 100-acre redevelopment just south of the Gateway Arch that is focused at the intersection of advanced manufacturing and construction. And what we heard earlier in one of the presentations was the impact that the construction industry and advanced manufacturing is having on our economic state and around the country. And so we believe that in order for us to see advancements in construction, we have to come up with an economic solution. And we believe that is also prefabrication, modular componentized building methods that is partnered around advanced manufacturing, where we'll see an increase in the ability to build faster and cheaper. In doing so, we know that that also means that there has to be new advancements in those industries, which comes very heavily on the research and development. So applied research is a huge component of what Gateway South has to accomplish in order for this to be strategically implemented across not only the region first, and then looking at applying that across the country. And we, with that, tying it here, so one of the biggest questions is, why St. Louis? So St. Louis has a huge history, a very rich history in advanced manufacturing and construction. And we saw that, some of those stats from what Phyllis presented earlier, just before we came on stage. And so when we look at that component and we take what's already been done here, we can tie ourselves to that advanced manufacturing component and bring in that construction component and become the national hub for construction. Construction is one of the only industries that does not have a national hub. You think of finance, you think of Wall Street, you think of cinema, you think of Hollywood. With the rich history here in St. Louis, around geospatial and aerospace, automotives, applied bioscience, you have to also think about how do we continue to grow on that field. And we believe that it's going to be the advancement of modular and prefab. We just saw the HUD on the federal level just came out of a report saying that this has to be componentized building, has to be added to traditional building methods in order for us to get back to where we were as one of the greatest nations to build and create from infrastructure. We also see states like California that cost of living has increased significantly. The national average for a prefab and modular building is around 7%. In California, it's 13%. UCLA just came out with a study last year stating that they predict by 2030, the national average will be 13 to 15%. If we get ahead of that now here today, St. Louis could be that center that distributes that componentized modular component for the rest of the country.
All right, thanks, Chauncey. So exciting threesome up here. I'm just glad I feel very humbled to be here with these experts and looking forward to hearing some of their perspectives on some of these questions. And I don't know about all of you, but we're going through a lot of change in higher education. It's just like everything is, since COVID, is just kind of in a whirlwind. We're changing a lot of the way we do operations, how we interface with students. And I'll start with Corey. What is driving change in the advanced manufacturing industry today?
Well, and I think it was touched on by Charles and then a little bit by Phyllis as well. You know, we have seen a divergence, if you will, of employment and productivity. And you also, when you saw Phyllis talk about the challenge we have from a regionally, even from a workforce demographic perspective. If I put that another way, I know the Manufacturing Institute highlights that there's going to be 2.1 million job openings in the next 7 to 8 years. If I bring that in another lens around that, and it really highlights Phyllis's work on the demographics, for every 4 individuals that leave manufacturing, only one's coming in. And primarily leaving because of retirement, but for a variety of reasons. But that challenge is only going to increase. And so I think there's 2 things that are really driving the needed change in manufacturing. One, we have to ensure that we are as productive as we possibly can be and use technology where it makes sense. That can be in automation, that can be in additive, that can be in a variety of techniques to improve the productivity of our workforce in producing those products. I think that's inevitable. But I think also the thing that is driving it is, and we see this everywhere, is technology and technology change is on such a pace right now. There is that natural intersection, and Dr. Pittman, it gets back to your comment, that we have a perception around, well, manufacturing is a dimly lit building, et cetera, rather than the high-tech industry that it is. And so I think we've only just begun to explore what technology can do. And I think one of the exciting things about what we see here regionally is what it can do in collaboration across sectors. What can we learn from active pharmaceutical ingredient production that has benefits into aerospace or automotive and vice versa? So I think both of those phenomena are really driving the change that we see right now.
All right.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, and I agree with what Corey was saying, is that we have to be focused on how do we improve productivity where advanced manufacturing can assist. But what I'd also add is that it's in our interest as a nation and as a region to be recognizing that in order to be competitive and relevant, we need to look at advanced manufacturing capabilities. And the reason why I say that is offshoring isn't a new phenomenon. We just didn't wake up and realize that because of COVID, all this manufacturing has been taking place offshore. It's been going on for 30 years, and there's a reason why that has been happening. But in order to be competitive, in order to bring that manufacturing back to the United States, we just can't keep doing it the way that we've already done it, always done it, because that's the reason why manufacturers have left. We also have to recognize that in order to be cost competitive, the best way to do that is to reduce our production cost. Advanced manufacturing has shown that to be cost competitive, we can reduce production costs by 30 to 50%. Now you've given a reason for the manufacturers to say, hey, if I can still pay a living wage and remain competitive with a competitive salary, still adhere to all the environmental regulations that as I need to, but do it in a way that I can reduce my costs, my production costs, now I'm interested. Now I have a reason to be engaged and to adopt some of this technology. And the other thing is, though, if we don't do it, and this is where the relevance comes in, and I'm going to speak just for pharmaceuticals right now. Remember, the active ingredient is the think tank. That's what makes the drugs work. That's where the intellectual property is. That's where all the innovation is. If that stays out of the country, all we do here in the United States is make pills. We buy API from India or China or some other country, bring it in here, and all we do is push it into a tablet. All right, anybody can do that. We now will have lost the economic competitive advantage the United States has as an innovative pharmaceutical industry if all we're doing is just making pills and tablets and putting it into a syringe. We have to bring this technology back. We have to bring this capability back. We have no other choice, and at least as we look at it from the public health interest.
So I want to look at it from the construction lens and why construction needs advanced manufacturing. And so if we go back to 1914, the Empire State Building was built in about a year's time. But then you fast forward, the Freedom Tower was built in 8 years' time. And so we're seeing there hasn't been much advancements in the construction industry in the last 120 so years. And so in order for us to get back to doing things in a more time-efficient way, we need to look at it from a manufacturing component, which means applying that research, bringing in this advanced manufacturing piece that we could do things at a more timely basis. When we first able to engage with Corey and his team, their logistical statics, and we're saying, hey, how fast can we produce construction components? And immediately said, we think with the research that's out there and to build on that, it's easily 30 to 50% by the time we activate this research component with the AMAC partnership.
All right, I'd be willing to bet artificial intelligence is going to play into this. We're getting a little ahead of that game, but it's just, you're right. I mean, AI has hit higher ed like nobody's business. Whether the students are using it, the faculty are using it, that's certainly changing the game. And I'm sitting here listening to the three of you thinking, boy, a lot more education and training, thinking about this workforce question. And hope I just didn't answer it, but I'll put this out. Two-part question for both Chauncey and Kevin. What is the greatest issue or challenge for the workforce in advanced manufacturing in St. Louis? And Chauncey and Kevin, you're both working in different industries in manufacturing. Chauncey, what are your thoughts on challenges for the manufacturing workforce within construction and the trades?
Yeah, so again, guys, I know this is around advanced manufacturing, but I'm going twofold here, right, this intersection. And so you look at construction, the first thing we're looking at, I'm going to touch on is diversity, right? And so in the construction industry, it's about 9% female workers, but in advanced manufacturing, it's about 30%. Also, when you look at the skilled trades component and what it takes to get into the industry, we're looking at it from traditional construction. It's around a year and a half to 2 year process to really hit that livable wage, what Phyllis had up as that middle skill component. Well, if you're layering that with advanced manufacturing, it becomes a significantly less amount of time. And so the idea is that with a cohesive training component with advanced manufacturing and allowing for the ability for all the components of construction and the trades to be in one centralized location, there's no loss in communication, which expedites the process of putting buildings together. In traditional construction, the architects don't talk to the engineers don't talk to the GCs, and by the time you get to the actual working site, there is the telephone game. And so there's a margin of error. Advanced manufacturing cuts that margin of error out, which essentially cuts out the contingency that you would need in your traditional construction. It's precise, it's to a T, and it's faster.
All right. Thanks, Chauncey. Kevin, what are your thoughts related to pharmaceutical manufacturing in the workforce?
I think it's first important just to kind of level set. What are we talking about when we're talking about advanced manufacturing pharmaceuticals? It can be somewhat esoteric, a big thought out there. Most of your pharmaceuticals, whether it be API, active ingredients, or finished dose products, are manufactured by what we call a traditional batch manufacturing. If any of you have ever been on a brewery tour, you look at these big vats in the brewery, that's a batch process. The batch, it does one thing in that big 3-story tower, then it moves to the next batch, and then to the next batch. And over a period of time, you have beer. Same thing with pharmaceuticals. It's old, it's clunky, it's somewhat inefficient, but it's what people know. It's what manufacturers know how to make a drug using 80-year-old technology. The biggest challenge that we have then from a manufacturer's perspective is the adoption of new technology. All right? And so remember what I said earlier, most of these drugs are generics. And the generic industry is the least apt to be able to afford investments in new technology. So you have to give them a really good reason for them to start to make that investment. But once you get there, once they start to adapt that new technology, the other biggest challenge is just getting individuals to then self-identify and saying, hey, that's a job I can do. Most of these new jobs, and when we talk about advanced manufacturing, are not PhDs or masters or biochemists. These are technicians. These are data analysts. These are individuals who know how to read the equipment. Advanced manufacturing is nothing more than you put it in one end and through a continuous process. Remember we talked about batch. It kind of goes from point A to point B. With advanced manufacturing, such as what we call continuous flow, you put all your ingredients in. It's a continuously in motion. Then over a period of time, out comes your product. Now the value here is that you take what could be a year production process and you bring it down to a month. Or you take months manufacturing process and you bring it down to weeks, or weeks down to days. So we accelerate the entire manufacturing process, but we need individuals who can identify and do the data analysts and do the analytics and fix these machines and tinker with the machines, because these are running continuously now. So that's where the value is. And these are individuals that you don't need a 4-year degree. You can do it with an associate's or certificate. But these are very well-paying and career-advancing jobs.
All right, let's move from challenges to opportunities. And Corey, we'll start with you. What is the greatest opportunity in advanced manufacturing, both today and then looking 5 to 10 years in the future?
Well, I think we've touched on several aspects of that, and really appreciate Chauncey and Kevin and their insights there. I may take that just a little bit in a different path, and it is, I think the opportunity here really comes down to the people, really comes down to the workforce. And when I look at that opportunity, we also have challenges to realize that. You know, we've talked about some of the workforce deltas that we see. So I look at it and I think three things come to my mind. First off is awareness and perception around what advanced manufacturing is and the opportunities that provides. You know, there is that perception gap, I think, Dr. Pittman, that you mentioned. I think, secondly, as a community and folks interested in and driving workforce development, I think advanced manufacturing and the rapid evolution of that is going to require us to really turn up the gain on our workforce development and training agility. When we find gaps identified from industry, we have to rapidly address those. And that can't be a 2-year process, a 3-year process, a 4-year process, or we'll lose ground as Kevin cited. But then I think the third aspect of that is, and again, I view it as, it's probably more broadly applicable in advanced manufacturing, but it really gets, again, back to workforce and the people. And Phyllis, you touched on it. We have to address the obstacles to the training and development that are available today. Whether that is transportation, whether that is childcare, whether that is financial, whether that is I have a full-time job to pay for. And I don't believe we can do that in silos. I think we have to do that collectively and regionally. And I think advanced manufacturing, I think, really gives us an impetus for and a catalyst for to get our head around that, because manufacturing isn't just a sector, it applies across the board as we see.
All right. Kevin or Chauncey, anything you'd like to add?
Sure. I think there's 4 benefits I see with advanced manufacturing, and I echo what Corey was saying here, is just, you know, just what the value proposition of getting the workforce in and training a new workforce. Imagine you're the President of the United States, and now you're facing another national public health emergency. The direction of the President and the administration, which is embraced by the Congress, is that the next event, the next COVID, the next influenza outbreak, whatever it may be, we have to take that manufacturing process from a year down to a month. How do you do that? How do you vaccinate, regardless of what your position is on vaccines or just healthcare in general? But there are still approximately 100 million people that would have to be vaccinated within 30 days. So these are very real scenarios in which we're talking about, and very real scenarios in which we're relying on which a country which could potentially be an adversary. All of a sudden, the dynamics in the chessboard can change very quickly. So the value of advanced manufacturing is speed to market. You can move and accelerate the whole production time down to a very manageable number. That's one. The second thing is improved efficiencies. Many of the reasons why some of your drugs are being recalled or being pulled from the market, there's a variety of reasons why it's happened, but one of the number one reasons is that the drugs contain a contaminant, bacteria. Bacteria in your eye drops all of a sudden cause eye blindness. Who wants that? Nobody. So what you want to do is have a more efficient production manufacturing process, is what only you can achieve through advanced manufacturing. The third is reduce and lower production costs. And the fourth is just the environmental benefit. You can take a manufacturing process that takes and consumes a very large chemical plant and bring it down to a piece of equipment that is no larger than the size in which the space that we're sitting in. And the value there now is that you have less chemicals going into it, therefore you have less risk and exposure to the employee. It's a contained process. You have less waste that comes out of it, and you now have a more timely, more efficient process. And so the value of all the things that advanced manufacturing are, not only whether it's production, but costs and efficiency, are there. It's just a matter now of adopting it.
So Yes, I want to agree with everything, and you guys touched on a lot of stuff that I was going to say, but I'll let you guys take that which and win. So I'll just hit on the last piece, right? And the last piece for especially is for us is the exposure to young people. I think when you look at advanced manufacturing, first of all, we know statistically speaking, if a young person by middle school isn't exposed to an industry, they're 82% likely not to enter the industry, right? And so layering at what Corey just said around us doing this from a collective component of the 8 different verticals and around advanced manufacturing, but then also identifying those young people and getting them exposed. It's a lot easier, at least for them to see the facilities, to touch what we're to in real time feel what we're doing, to get exposure on what are the different avenues for advanced manufacturing, and that they can now have an opportunity. And this goes across all of the demographic spectrums that Phyllis showed earlier, even fully able-bodied people, right? When you think about advanced manufacturing, when you're in one location, repeating your process, being very specific in what your job is, you can have a disability and perform it as well as you would need to do if you were full able and had to communicate with your coworkers. So I think there's a multitude of opportunities layered on top of what Kevin and Corey have already put into, I've already said in this arena here today. But I know that that we're going to continue to see this growth, and I know with advanced manufacturing being a key component here in this region, in 10 years from now, what we're talking about today will be outdated versus what we've seen be the standard over the last 3 decades.
All right, thanks, Chauncey. And so we're about ready to wrap up our panel discussion. I got one more question, but I do want to throw this idea out. In turn back to Corey's point about perception of advanced manufacturing, I would encourage any of you or your companies or other companies, it seems like where the educational institutions and the manufacturers can partner up in making families and children, maybe middle school is the appropriate level, I'm not sure, aware of these opportunities and what it is. We've had some success with Boeing with our pre-employment training program of going out to the high schools and getting them engaged in some early college training or education. I think the earlier we can reach out to make people see these pathways, the better it can certainly go for us. Okay, so for the final question, what impact do you expect your organization to have on St. Louis? So Kevin, we'll start with you.
Thank you for the question. And Chauncey, I'm sorry if we answered all your answers first, I guess. I think, my vision for the St. Louis region is with advanced manufacturing, is that as you were just saying, with families and industry and academic institutions, we fully embrace what the promise of advanced manufacturing is and can be to realize the full potential for creating new jobs that are equitable and inclusive. What we're doing right now is we're level setting everything. All right, we're level setting that everybody now who wants an opportunity has an opportunity based on where they may live, based on the color of their skin, based on their socioeconomic situation. But these are jobs that are meant for the individuals anybody who wants to have these jobs, these opportunities are going to be there. And I find that incredibly exciting. As an industry, though, we just have to make sure that what are we doing to make sure that individuals we get them to the point where they can identify saying, hey, this is a job I want, and I think the St. Louis region is leading not only the state, but I also think that we can be leading the nation in embracing and actually fulfilling the promise of what advanced manufacturing can be.
All right, thanks. Corey.
Yeah, and so I'll pick up right where you were, Kevin, and certainly on the productivity, the efficiency, but let's talk from an equitable growth and jobs perspective. And I'll be extremely brief, but I'll give you an example. So the Advanced Manufacturing Innovation Center is really modeled off an effort that started in Sheffield, UK about 20 some odd years ago. If you know much about Sheffield, it was a steel town and it was in significant decline, both industrial as well as residential. And there was this idea of creating a manufacturing research center in between the research universities and industry. If you look at it today, The Advanced Manufacturing Research Center in Sheffield, UK has 500 full-time employees. It has a full-time corporate membership, meaning companies involved in the R&D of about 125, most of which have set up residence in Sheffield to take advantage of workforce and the R&D. And that has brought literally thousands of jobs. The exact same thing can and will happen here. And I think built on the multiple sectors that have strength already in this region, I have no doubt we can surpass that. It won't happen overnight. It's going to be a journey, but it will happen here. And that's where I think that's what excites me the most about this.
Good. Thanks, Corey. Chauncey.
Yeah, excuse me. So when you think about advanced manufacturing in St. Louis and or at the intersection with construction, St. Louis is home to 4 of the top construction companies in the country, home to one of the largest construction materials companies. And then going back to what I mentioned earlier about the rich history of advanced manufacturing, we already have the infrastructure to continue to build on and advance this industry. And I think that with that being said, we have the equivalent of what we're seeing in advanced manufacturing in the UK, to do that not only in this country, but specifically in this region. I think we also, this is, sorry for being a St. Louis in here, we have a smaller community than some of your larger cities, where we're all intertwined and we can work together to accomplish a cohesive goal to bring people to this industry with a multitude of opportunities through AMEC and other industries that makes this the ideal component of how to do industry advancement in advanced manufacturing. I think that also it comes back to what you just mentioned, Dr. Pittman, around the pathways. We are in a component where everybody has access to everybody in this city. We can upskill very easily inside of these industries. There's an opportunity to also to partner back with the universities and the schools, where when inside of our industries, you have immediate access to come in at a livable wage with the cost of living in our region, and then upskill yourself to a real career path through communication with the schools like St. Louis Community College and some of our 4-year institutions, which goes to like what we have with SLU with their civil engineering. So coming out of here with some of your mechanical, going to civil. Those are just easy pathways that are very readily accessible for any person that wants to get involved in industry. And I think that's why it's St. Louis. That's why we're passionate about making this a success.
All right, thanks, Chauncey. And I know I've already mentioned this, so I always like to get another commercial in. Friday, we have our groundbreaking for our Advanced Manufacturing Center. That's a 100,000 square foot building. We want to fill that building with students that create pathways in a pipeline to all of you gentlemen. So Kevin, Corey, and Chauncey, thank you for taking your time to be here and sharing your expertise with us. Could you all give them a round of applause? And again, I just want to thank you for taking the last hour and 40 minutes to be with us. I know that you're all very, very busy. I hope the report's useful to you over the next coming year. I'd also like to thank Phyllis Ellison. Phyllis, where are you? She's somewhere. Stand up. Give her a round of applause. Yeah, her team put this all together. I just show up and be the facilitator. So I'm very thankful for Phyllis and for the staff that have worked so hard to make this event possible. Everyone have a safe drive back to work or home. Thanks for your time.